Saint Catherine of Siena. On March 25, 1347, in Siena, in the Tuscany region of Italy, Lapa Benincasa gave birth to 2 daughters, baptized Giovanna and Caterina, Italian for Joan and Catherine. The infants were not strong, and Lapa knew that she would not be able to nurse both of them. She found a wet nurse for Giovanna and nursed Caterina herself. Unfortunately, poor little Giovanna died soon afterwards, prompting Lapa to lavish extra care on Caterina, who, probably because of this, secretly became her favorite child. One more baby, Lapa's 25th child and her last, followed the twin girls. This new arrival was named Giovanna, after her deceased sister. Lapa Benincasa was a kind and capable wife and mother. Her husband, Giacomo, was from her same village and considered by all as a good, honest, God-fearing man of integrity. He never used or tolerated bad language in his home and refrained from speaking ill of others, even those who wronged him, saying, "God will show him the error of his ways and be our defender." Giacomo, a skilled dyer of linen and woolen cloth, had married Lapa shortly after his parents' death. The couple, who were from a highly respectable class, lived comfortably, with Giacomo's sons eventually joining his successful business. Little Caterina was a delightful child, so beloved that neighbors often sought to bring her into their homes because of her joyful personality, bubbling laughter, and cheerful chatter. At age 5, she learned the Hail Mary, repeating it throughout the day, and developing a habit of kneeling on each step to pray it as she ascended and descended the stairs. When Caterina was about 6, while returning with her brother from visiting their married sister Bonaventura, she experienced a profound vision. Looking skyward, she saw a beautiful regal bridal chamber hovering above a nearby church. There, Jesus Christ sat enthroned in papal attire, accompanied by the apostles Peter, Paul, and John. As Caterina watched, transfixed, Jesus raised his right hand, made the sign of the cross, and blessed her. This moment marked a significant turning point in Caterina's spiritual journey. As her spiritual director and first biographer, Blessed Raymond of Capua, described, "From now onwards, the fire of divine love burned within her, enlightening her mind, kindling her will, strengthening her power of thought, and enabling her external acts to conform to the laws of God." Caterina grew up deeply inspired by the lives and teachings of the Holy Fathers of Egypt, as well as the saints, especially Saint Dominic. This inspired her to emulate their lives, resulting in a profound longing that consumed her thoughts entirely. She abandoned childish games, embraced silence, and dedicated herself to prayer, meditation, and physical mortifications. Unlike most children her age, Caterina ate sparingly, consuming only enough to sustain herself. Her devotion attracted other young girls in the neighborhood, who gathered around her to hear her speak about God and to imitate her actions. From an early age, she yearned for solitude and isolation, but she gradually realized that this was not God's plan for her life. Caterina developed a firm resolve to maintain purity of both body and soul. At the tender age of 7, she prayed fervently to the Blessed Virgin Mary for guidance in following God's will for her spiritual development. After deep meditation, she made a vow of virginity, committing herself as a bride of Christ. This marked the beginning of her lifelong struggle against worldly temptations. She gave up eating meat entirely and devised ways to avoid consuming it during family meals, passing it to her brother Stefano or secretly feeding it to the cats. Despite her young age, she practiced severe penances and mortifications while cultivating a profound zeal for saving souls and a particular devotion to saints who had labored for this cause. Her humility, faith, charity, wisdom, and devotion became so evident that even her family marveled at the spiritual depth of such a young child. In 14th century Tuscany, where life expectancy hovered around 40 years, girls were considered marriageable by age 12. When Caterina reached this age, local custom dictated that she remain mostly at home under strict supervision, since unmarried girls were not permitted to go out alone. Her parents began preparing her for marriage. Her mother, Lapa, taught her grooming and etiquette to make her more appealing to potential suitors. However, Caterina steadfastly ignored these lessons because of her secret vow of virginity. Lapa then sought help from Caterina's beloved sister Bonaventura, hoping she might influence the young girl. Under Bonaventura's guidance, Caterina paid more attention to her appearance, but remained resolute in her vow. Tragedy struck when Bonaventura died in childbirth shortly thereafter. This loss deeply affected Caterina, reinforcing her conviction about the futility of worldly pursuits. She turned with even greater fervor toward Jesus and developed a special devotion to St. Mary Magdalene, striving to emulate her in every possible way. Caterina's parents, still reeling from the loss of their daughter Bonaventura, redoubled their efforts to see Caterina married, hoping it might ease their grief. Sensing their intentions, Caterina intensified her prayers and meditation while avoiding all male company. Despite her attempts to explain her vow to remain Christ's bride, her parents sought help from a Dominican friar to persuade her to yield to their wishes. However, upon meeting Caterina, the friar found himself deeply impressed by her steadfast devotion and holy intentions. Rather than dissuading her, he advised Caterina to prove her resolve to her parents in a dramatic fashion by cutting off her hair. Unlike today, in Caterina's time, for a young, unmarried woman to cut off her hair was a radical rejection of societal norms, potentially ruining her marriage prospects and altering her social identity. It was a serious, life-changing decision. Caterina enthusiastically embraced the idea. She took a pair of scissors to her beautiful hair, cutting it down to the roots. To conceal her act, she cleverly fashioned a head covering consisting of a cap with an attached veil. When her mother noticed this unusual headgear, she questioned Caterina about it. However, Caterina skillfully sidestepped her mother's inquiries. Frustrated by her daughter's evasiveness, Lapa abruptly snatched the veiled cap from Caterina's head, revealing the closely cropped hair beneath. The sight so shocked Lapa that she began to wail in protest, while Caterina calmly replaced her cap and walked away. Lapa's cries alerted Giacomo, Caterina's father, and her brothers, who were equally furious upon learning the cause. This rebellious act intensified the family's efforts to break Caterina's will. They openly persecuted, threatened, and abused her, vowing to force her into marriage regardless of her feelings. They took away her privacy, denying her a room of her own, burdened her with constant housework to prevent prayer and meditation, dismissed the maid, and assigned Caterina all the menial kitchen tasks. Taunts and insults designed to hurt her feelings became commonplace. They even found a suitable young man as a potential husband and increased pressure on Caterina to consent to the marriage. Despite this onslaught, Caterina remained serene. Inspired by the Holy Spirit, she constructed a secret cell in her mind, a sanctuary that no one could take from her, in which she could peacefully remain. She later would urge others, "Build yourself a spiritual cell, which you can always take with you, and that is the cell of self-knowledge. You will find there also the knowledge of God's goodness to you." She also was divinely inspired to reimagine her father as Jesus, her mother as the Virgin Mary, and her brothers and other family members as the apostles and disciples. This perspective allowed her to serve them contentedly while simultaneously serving Christ. Her family was bewildered by her composure, unaware of the spiritual transformation behind it. Deprived of a room of her own, Caterina ingeniously adopted her brother Stefano's room for her spiritual practices. Since Stefano was single and often out during the day, she could use his space to pray and meditate in solitude. At night, while he slept, she would continue her prayers, storming heaven with pleas to protect her virginity. The more her family persecuted her, the stronger and more steadfast she became, fortified by God's grace and consolations. Her father, Giacomo, who was gentler by nature than the rest of the family, began to reflect on his daughter's extraordinary behavior. Over time, he became increasingly convinced that she was being guided by the Spirit of God. One day, Giacomo entered Stefano's room to retrieve something while his son was out. The door was open, so he stepped inside. To his astonishment, he saw Caterina kneeling in prayer in a corner of the room. Above her head hovered a snow-white dove, which flew away as soon as he entered. Startled, Giacomo asked Caterina where the dove had come from, but she had not noticed it. Deeply moved by what he had seen, Giacomo continued to ponder the mysterious event. Caterina realized that if she were to preserve her vow of virginity, she needed to take the habit of the Order of Saint Dominic. She prayed fervently for this grace and developed an even deeper devotion to Saint Dominic. One night, she had a vivid dream in which she saw the founders of various religious orders. Among them was Saint Dominic himself, whom she recognized because he held a dazzling white lily that burned brightly in his hands. Each founder encouraged her to join their respective orders, but Caterina kept her eyes fixed on Saint Dominic, moving toward him. He stepped forward to meet her and held out the habit of the Sisters of Penance of Saint Dominic, a lay branch of the Dominican order that was well established in Siena. He said to her, "Sweetest daughter, take courage and fear no obstacle, for you will undoubtedly put on this habit, as is your wish." Overcome with joy and crying tears of happiness, Caterina awoke from the dream, filled with renewed courage. The next day, emboldened by her vision, Caterina called her parents and brothers together to make a declaration that would change everything. She explained that as a child, after deep reflection, she had made a solemn vow of virginity to Jesus Christ and promised herself to him alone for all eternity. Now older and more mature in understanding, she declared, "It would be easier to soften a stone than to remove these resolutions from my heart." She continued, "The more you go on about this, the more you will be wasting your time. I must obey God rather than men. Further, if you want to keep me in this house as a servant, I'm quite prepared to stay and will willingly do my best to serve you. But if you prefer to cast me out, you can rest assured that I shall not deviate from my intention. I have a rich and powerful husband who will never let me die of hunger, and I am certain that he will never let me go without any of the things I need." Her words left her family stunned and in tears as they realized the sincerity and unshakable determination behind Caterina's intentions. They could only stare in awe at this girl who had always been so silent and shy, but now spoke with such clarity, courage, and eloquence. Giacomo, recalling many things, including the miraculous dove he had seen above Caterina's head, was deeply moved by her conviction. Being more God-fearing than the others, he finally broke the silence. "So, keep your vow. Do exactly as you wish and as the Holy Spirit teaches you. From now on, we shall leave you in peace to your holy works. We have no reason to lament if, instead of a mortal man, we are to have God and an immortal man in our family." With those words from Giacomo, peace descended upon Caterina's household at last. Her family ceased their opposition and allowed her to pursue her divine calling without further interference. They gave her a small room of her own where she could pray, meditate, and carry out her penances. She constructed a bed of bare wooden boards, which she used both for meditation and sleep. Her pillow was a block of wood. She wore clothing made of wool, and although she initially wore a hair shirt as part of her penance, her sense of cleanliness led her to replace it with an iron chain fastened tightly around her waist. Her spiritual director and biographer, Brother Raymond of Capua, recounts that Caterina eventually overcame the need for sleep to such an extent that she required only half an hour every other night, succumbing only when exhaustion overtook her. Her diet became increasingly austere. At first, she ate only bread with raw herbs and drank well water. By age 20, she gave up bread entirely and ate only raw herbs. Brother Raymond claimed that during all the time he knew her, she lived without eating anything except the Eucharist, a feat he attributed to miraculous intervention. Although these accounts may seem incredible, Brother Raymond, who was later beatified as Blessed Raymond of Capua, attested to their truthfulness. Given his sanctity and first-hand knowledge of Caterina's life, it's difficult to doubt his testimony. Caterina once told Brother Raymond, "God, for my sins, has afflicted me with a special kind of illness that makes it impossible for me to eat. I should like to be able to eat, but I can't." It seems extremely doubtful that her inability to eat was God's punishment for her sins. Some modern scholars suggest Caterina may have suffered from anorexia mirabilis, a condition characterized by extreme fasting for religious reasons. As Brother Raymond explained, her ability to live so long without food could have been achieved only through divine means. Clearly, these extraordinary practices are far beyond normal human capacity, so do not try this at home. Throughout her life, Caterina suffered from various illnesses, including dysentery, angina attacks, and periods of extreme weakness, probably brought on by her extreme fasting. As Brother Raymond observed, there seemed to be two Caterinas within her, one that suffered a state of exhaustion and another that tirelessly toiled in spirit, with the latter sustaining and strengthening her weakened flesh. Following the extraordinary dream in which St. Dominic assured Caterina that she would receive the habit of his order, she redoubled her spiritual exercises with greater fervor than ever. She felt that Satan was intensifying his attacks on her soul, and often wept as she begged the Lord to make her worthy to join the Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic. Caterina gently pleaded with her parents for their support and implored the sisters themselves to accept her into their community. While Lapa no longer tried to dissuade Caterina from her ascetic lifestyle, she lamented its severity. Caterina urged Lapa to speak with the sisters on her behalf. Reluctantly, Lapa approached the Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic with Caterina's request. However, they refused to admit single women into their order, whether young or old. They accepted only respectable widows of mature age due to the lack of cloistered living arrangements. Their concern for maintaining the utmost respectability among their members made them hesitant. Shortly afterward, Caterina fell gravely ill with a high fever and blisters covering her body, a condition common among adolescents at the time, according to Brother Raymond. While bedridden, Caterina told Lapa, "If you want me to be well and strong again, satisfy my one wish, to receive the habit of the Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic. If you don't, I'm afraid that God and St. Dominic between them will see to it that you don't have me with you in any kind of habit." Alarmed by this declaration, Lapa hurried back to the sisters and begged them once more to reconsider. This time the sisters agreed, but imposed a condition. They would accept Caterina only if she was not too attractive, fearing that excessive beauty might lead to scandal in the future. Several sisters accompanied Lapa home to assess Caterina in person. When they saw her disfigured by illness and blisters, they could scarcely tell what she truly looked like, but were deeply moved by her sincerity and eloquence as she expressed her intentions. Impressed by Caterina's spiritual maturity and determination, upon their return home, they held a meeting with the Dominican friars overseeing their order and unanimously agreed to accept Caterina as one of their own. They informed Lapa that once Caterina recovered from her illness, she should come to the Dominican church to receive the habit. Not long afterwards, Caterina went with Lapa to the church. In a solemn ceremony attended by the sisters and the presiding friar, Caterina was given the black and white habit of the Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic, white symbolizing innocence and black representing humility. Although as a lay member, she was not required to take formal vows of chastity, poverty, or obedience like those in religious orders, Caterina privately resolved to observe them scrupulously. Her vow of chastity had already been assured through her earlier promise of virginity. To better observe it, she decided to embrace silence. So for 3 years, she never spoke except during confession. She committed herself to obedience to the brother director overseeing the nuns and the prioress, as well as her confessor. As for poverty, Caterina practiced it so rigorously that even though she lived in a home where there was plenty, she took nothing for herself except what was necessary for distribution to the poor, with full consent from her father. Caterina's life as a Sister of Penance was marked by radical asceticism, but also profound joy in serving God through humility and love for others. She lived a life of intense devotion and spiritual experiences within the confines of her small cell at home. She emerged from it only for church, creating a desert-like solitude amidst the bustling world around her. Her nightly prayer vigils coincided with the sleeping hours of the Dominican friars, whom she affectionately called her brothers. In the mornings, she would rest, entrusting the friars to Jesus' care. In her cell, Caterina experienced numerous visions of Jesus, which initially manifested in her mind, but later engaged her physical senses as well. At first, she feared these visions might be demonic deceptions. However, Jesus provided her with guidance on discerning true visions from false ones. "When my visions begin, they inspire fear," he said. "But as they develop, they fortify. They begin with a kind of grief, but they grow sweeter and sweeter. Whereas the opposite happens in the case of visions sent by the enemy. At first they seem to give a kind of contentment and sweetness, but as they go on, pain and nausea begin to develop in the soul of the beholder." Jesus further explained that his visions, rooted in truth, would always lead to greater knowledge and humility, while demonic visions would instill pride and self-importance. As Caterina's visions intensified, she often fell into states of religious ecstasy. These experiences enhanced her spiritual teaching abilities, and led to miraculous occurrences. In one profound vision, Jesus imparted a fundamental spiritual truth to her. "Do you know, daughter, who you are and who I am? You are she who is not, whereas I am he who is." This revelation emphasized the complete dependence of all creatures on God, fostering humility and acknowledging the divine source of all goodness. In another vision, Jesus told her, "Daughter, think of me. If you do, I will immediately think of you." In this way, she would shut out all other thoughts and anxieties about her body and soul, retaining only the thought of God, while He in turn promised to ease her anxieties and care for her needs. This divine guidance shaped Caterina's spiritual practice and her approach to life's challenges. It was during this period that the Lord began gently nudging Caterina to engage more with the world and its people. He assured her that His divine presence would remain with her even as she ventured out. During their intimate conversations, He would often say, "Go, it's time for dinner, and your family is about to gather at the table. Join them, and then return to me." Though Caterina would weep at the thought of separation, He lovingly explained, "It's essential that you fulfill all your duties. Through my grace, you'll be able to help others as well as yourself. I want you to bind yourself more closely to me through love of your neighbor. Remember, there are two precepts of love: love for me and love for your neighbor. As I've said before, the law and the prophets are contained within these commandments." The Lord guided Caterina, helping her interact comfortably with others so she could better carry out His work. She began performing acts of humility and charity while maintaining her devout prayer life. Caterina took on the most menial household chores, such as sweeping and kitchen work. When the servant fell ill, Caterina not only took over her duties, but also cared for her until she recovered. Caterina's life was a stark contrast of religious ecstasies and vicious demonic attacks. During these attacks, witnesses sometimes saw her thrown into the fireplace. Miraculously, she would emerge unscathed, smiling and reassuring onlookers, "Don't be afraid of the old pickpocket," her nickname for the devil because he tried to snatch souls. As Caterina's charitable nature grew, so did the Lord's favor. Determined to help the needy, she asked her father Giacomo for permission to give alms from the family's money, as she had taken a vow of poverty and had nothing of her own. Giacomo agreed and informed the household. Caterina gave generously but discerningly, often helping the most needy even if they were too ashamed to ask. She would secretly deliver food and supplies to needy families, slipping away before being noticed. One day, weakened by illness, she was unable to get away fast enough and was caught in the act by a poor widow who recognized her habit. Caterina's charitable work soon took on miraculous proportions. One famous incident, widely attested to at the time, involved a cask of wine in her family's home. Caterina began drawing from it daily to give to the poor. Normally, such a cask would last 2 to 3 weeks, but even with the family's daily use and Caterina's generous giving, it showed no signs of emptying after a month. The wine was praised for its exquisite quality. 3 months later, as harvest approached, the cellar master decided to empty the still full cask and transfer its contents to another jar to make room for the new wine. To everyone's astonishment, when opened, the cask that had been flowing with wine just the day before was completely dry, as if it hadn't held wine for months. Between 1367 and 1374, Caterina devoted herself to helping the sick and imprisoned in Siena, particularly at the hospital of Santa Maria della Scala. Her charitable works became well known, earning her the title of Santa Donna, which means holy woman. One example of her devotion to the sick was her care of Tecca, a woman suffering from advanced leprosy who was receiving inadequate attention at the hospital, but could not be treated at home because no one would go near her. When Caterina learned of Tecca's plight, she volunteered to look after her, visiting twice daily to bring necessities, feed her, and provide care. Initially grateful, Tecca's attitude soon turned demanding and abusive. She hurled insults and wicked insinuations when Caterina failed to meet her demands. Caterina, however, responded with gentleness and patience, pretending not to understand the harsh words. Lapa was annoyed by Tecca's behavior and warned her daughter about the risk of contracting leprosy. Caterina, undeterred, placed her trust in the Lord and continued her mission. Despite signs of infection appearing on her hands, Caterina persisted in her care until Tecca's death, at which she was present to lovingly console the woman. After Tecca's passing, Caterina washed and clothed the corpse, arranged it in the coffin, and buried it herself following the funeral rites. Miraculously, upon Tecca's burial, Caterina's hands cleared completely, showing no trace of infection. Many claim that her hands then became her most beautiful feature. In another instance, a sister of Penance named Andrea had been afflicted with breast cancer, producing a sore so foul-smelling that others avoided her. Caterina, perceiving this as a divine assignment, took it upon herself to care for Andrea with kindness and cheerfulness, promising her ongoing support. However, as time passed, Andrea's gratitude transformed into resentment, jealousy, and ultimately hatred, echoing the earlier experience with Tecca, the leper woman. Andrea began to suspect Caterina of impure conduct, and to the other nuns she openly accused Caterina of wickedness. When questioned, Caterina steadfastly maintained her innocence, declaring repeatedly, "I assure you, ladies and sisters in the faith, that by the grace of God I am a virgin." Seeking solace, she retreated to herself to pray. Jesus appeared to her, offering a choice between two crowns, one of gold adorned with precious stones and pearls, and another of thorns. He asked her to choose either the crown of thorns for earthly life and the jeweled one in heaven, or vice versa. Caterina unhesitatingly chose the crown of thorns for her earthly existence. Jesus then promised her that he would give her complete victory over the devil, whose schemes against her would all fall back upon his own evil head, to Caterina's greater glory. Strengthened by this encounter, Caterina returned to care for Andrea as if nothing had transpired. Andrea, astonished by Caterina's untiring kindness, began to feel remorseful. One day, as Caterina approached Andrea's bed, a radiant light from above illuminated the room, transforming Caterina's face into one of angelic beauty. Deeply moved by this vision, Andrea recognized Satan's influence on her behavior and tearfully begged Caterina's forgiveness. Caterina responded with compassion, saying, "I know that it was the enemy of the human race who caused all these scandalous things to happen and took you in so completely. So it is him I have to be offended with, not you." Andrea promptly confessed her error to everyone, affirming Caterina's purity and spiritual gifts. As Jesus had promised, Caterina emerged victorious over the enemy, and news of her sanctity began to spread. Caterina's zeal for saving souls led her to pray for the ability to perceive the spiritual condition of those she encountered. God granted this request, allowing her to discern more about people's spiritual condition than about their physical state. She once told her confessor, "Father, if you could see the beauty of a rational soul, you would be prepared to give your life 100 times over for the salvation of that soul, for there is nothing in this world that can compare with such beauty." During the bubonic plague that struck Siena in 1374, Caterina demonstrated extraordinary compassion and fortitude, dedicating herself to the care of the sick and dying. While many who were able to do so fled the city, Caterina chose to remain and serve those affected by the deadly disease. Tirelessly, she moved between hospitals and homes, nursing the ill, consoling them through prayer, and washing and clothing corpses for burial. She carried a small lamp and a smelling bottle to protect herself from the pestilent air as she worked day and night. Caterina also organized volunteers to assist in nursing the sick and located clergy to administer sacraments to the dying. Her prayers were said to have healed some of the gravely ill, while others reconciled with God in their final moments due to her encouragement. She ensured proper burials for the deceased, honoring their dignity even in death. The epidemic deeply affected Caterina personally, as it claimed the lives of 2 of her brothers, her sister Lisa, and several nieces and nephews. She grieved profoundly, but continued her mission to feed the poor and restore hope to those struggling in the aftermath of the plague. Her selfless actions during this crisis earned her widespread admiration in Siena, reinforcing her reputation as a saintly figure. In addition to caring for the poor and the sick, Caterina's compassionate work with prisoners, especially those condemned to death, was a significant part of her ministry. One of the most famous incidents involving Caterina's concern for the souls of prisoners occurred when 2 hardened criminals, their hearts filled with anger and their mouths screaming curses, were being paraded through the town in a cart. They were headed for brutal public torture and execution, and showing no remorse for their crimes. Caterina happened to be visiting a friend whose home overlooked the street where this was occurring. When she saw the terrible scene, her heart was moved with compassion. She saw a vision of the demons waiting to torment these men even further in hell. Without hesitation, Caterina began to pray fervently for the souls of these condemned men. She spoke to God with her characteristic frankness, questioning why he would allow his own creatures to suffer such torture, both in this world and the next. She reminded Jesus of how, during his crucifixion, he had forgiven the thief on the cross beside him. As the grim procession passed down the street and out of sight, Caterina was allowed by God to follow them in spirit. What happened next astonished everyone present. The 2 criminals, who had been shouting curses and refusing to speak with priests, suddenly fell silent. Then, to the amazement of the crowd, they cried out for a priest. Tears streamed down their faces as they confessed their sins. The condemned men claimed that Christ himself had appeared to them, urging them to repent and offering forgiveness. Their hearts, once hardened by sin, were now softened by divine grace. They faced their execution with peace, telling the crowd that they expected to be with Christ in heaven. This dramatic conversion left the town mystified. Only Caterina's close friends knew that she had intervened through her prayers. For days afterward, Caterina was heard expressing her gratitude to God for saving these men from a second prison of eternal damnation. One day, as Caterina prayed fervently in her room, Jesus appeared to her in a vision, and promised that her life was about to change in extraordinary ways. He revealed that she would transcend the limitations of her gender and embrace a new way of life, no longer avoiding the company of others, but instead laboring tirelessly for the salvation of souls. He assured her, "I shall put a kind of wisdom in your mouth that none will be able to resist. I will lead you before popes, before the heads of the Christian church and its people, and through the weak, as is my custom, I shall humble the pride of the powerful." True to his promise, Caterina's life transformed dramatically. Soon, an endless stream of people began descending from the mountains and countryside surrounding Siena to see her and hear her words. Her presence inspired profound spiritual renewal. Many of those who heard her teachings ran immediately to priests to confess their sins. It became evident to all that divine graces were being poured down upon them through Caterina's intercession. Caterina's passion for discussing God was inexhaustible. She found no greater joy than engaging in conversations about the divine with like-minded individuals, her enthusiasm growing with each exchange. In 1375, while praying before a crucifix in Pisa on the fourth Sunday in Lent, Caterina saw golden rays emanate from Christ's wounds, piercing her hands, feet, side, and heart. Her spiritual advisor, who was with her at the time, saw her thrust forward in agony and hold her arms out to her sides while in a trance. Though the pain was intense and immediate, out of humility, Caterina asked God that these stigmata remain invisible to others. Despite the absence of visible marks, the stigmata became a source of both agony and spiritual strength for her. Those close to Catherine observed her physical suffering, particularly on Fridays, though the cause remained unseen. The stigmata remained with her until her death, at which time it reportedly appeared on her body, confirming the reality of her mystical experience. As Jesus had promised, Caterina's remarkable mission soon extended beyond Siena, leading her to influence church leaders and ordinary people alike. Her spiritual gifts, including wisdom, insight into souls, and an immovable faith, became tools for reforming hearts and guiding souls towards salvation. Her influence was especially profound regarding the Avignon Papacy, a period from 1309 to 1376, during which 7 consecutive popes resided in Avignon, France, instead of Rome. It was also known as the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, because the papal court's move from Rome to Avignon was similar to the Jewish exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This unusual situation stemmed from a conflict between the papacy and the French monarchy, particularly after the confrontation between Pope Boniface VIII and King Philip IV of France, leading to the Pope's arrest and ultimately his death within a month. Pope Benedict XI was then elected Pope, but died a mere 8 months later. Philip IV influenced the subsequent election of Clement V, the Archbishop of Bordeaux, as the new Pope. Clement V, reluctant to move to Rome, established his court in Avignon in 1309. The papal residence remained in Avignon for the next 67 years, with all 7 popes during this period being French. This relocation of the papacy to French territory significantly impacted the Catholic Church's perception and authority, making it appear to be under French influence. Avignon at that time was part of the Kingdom of Arles, within the Holy Roman Empire. The city and its surroundings were under the rule of the House of Anjou, kings of Sicily. In 1348, Pope Clement VI purchased Avignon from Joanna I of Naples, consolidating papal control over the area. In this tumultuous landscape, Caterina emerged as an unlikely peacemaker, her voice rising above the clamor of warring city-states and a fractured church. As the daughter of a humble wool dyer, Caterina's ascent to political influence was extraordinary. Beginning in 1375, she wrote numerous letters to Pope Gregory XI, addressing various matters, including church reform and the importance of moving the papacy back to Rome. She emphasized that returning to Rome would make it easier for Gregory XI to achieve his goal of peace among the Italian city-states. In addition, she stressed the importance of expanding the influence of the papal states, which would be more effective from Rome. The year 1376 marked a decisive moment in Caterina's mission. Italy was torn apart by conflicts, with Florence leading a rebellion against papal authority. Caterina, driven by her resolute faith and yearning for unity, took on the mantle of an unofficial ambassador. She embarked on a perilous journey to Avignon to personally meet with Pope Gregory XI. Caterina spoke with fervor before the Pope and his Council of Cardinals, pleading for peace and urging the Pope to return to Rome. Her audacity was equaled only by her eloquence, as she dared to rebuke the pontiff with what he described as an intolerably dictatorial tone, a little sweetened with expressions of her perfect Christian deference. Nevertheless, Caterina's efforts bore fruit. The Pope, moved by her impassioned appeals, entrusted her with the delicate task of negotiating peace terms between the papacy and Florence. This was an unprecedented role for a woman of her time, let alone one without formal education or noble birth. The path to peace, however, was fraught with obstacles. The Florentines, known for their political cunning, sent Caterina as their emissary, but later dispatched new ambassadors, undermining her authority. Undeterred, Caterina pressed on, her resolve unshaken. Despite resistance from the French king and many cardinals, Gregory XI finally decided to return to Rome. The journey began on September 13, 1376, and after several stops, the Pope made his solemn entry into Rome on January 17, 1377. This move effectively ended the Avignon Papacy and would continue to shape church history in the following years. It was a significant step in restoring unity within the church, as it addressed concerns about the papacy's independence from French influence and reaffirmed Rome's position as the center of the Catholic Church. It was considered Caterina's crowning achievement and assured her place as one of the most influential figures in church history. In 1377, Caterina established a monastery for women near Siena. Around the same time, she began to compile her spiritual treatise, the Dialogue, which she dictated in her native tongue under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. The Dialogue covers topics such as trust in God's plan and guidance, exercising discretion, humble and sincere prayer, obedience, Christ as the bridge between humans and God, love and virtue, self-knowledge balanced with knowledge of God's goodness, the church as a place of spiritual growth, sin and redemption, and steps to spiritual development. But Caterina's work was far from over. In 1378, she found herself in Florence, once again tasked with brokering peace. The city was a cauldron of unrest, and Caterina's life was in constant danger. She narrowly escaped an assassination attempt, yet remained steadfast in her mission, believing that true reform of the church and society could only come through a profound spiritual awakening. After Gregory XI's death in March 1378, disputes over his successor led to the Western Schism, during which there were competing popes in both Rome and Avignon. With the outbreak of the schism, Caterina was summoned to Rome by the newly elected Pope Urban VI, where she spent the last 2 years of her life, devoting herself to prayer and dedicating herself to supporting the Pope's legitimacy. She engaged in extensive letter-writing campaigns, working tirelessly to convince nobles and cardinals of his rightful claim to the papacy. Despite the increasing turmoil in the church, the deepening schism, and her own disappointments, for the rest of her life, Caterina remained firm in her commitment to reform and renewal. The schism would not be fully resolved until the Council of Constance in 1417, nearly 3 decades after Caterina's death. However, her tireless efforts to reconcile warring factions, her bold advocacy for church reform, and her role in ending the Avignon Papacy left an indelible mark on history. Caterina died on April 29, 1380, at the age of 33, exhausted by her rigorous fasting and efforts for the church. She was initially buried in the cemetery of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome. After reports of miracles at her grave, in 1383, her body was moved inside the Basilica of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, where it remains today under the main altar. In 1430, her body was exhumed and discovered to be incorrupt. Caterina was canonized in 1461 by Pope Pius II. She was named co-patron saint of Italy in 1939 and of Europe in 1999 because of her enduring influence on the continent she worked so hard to unite. She was declared a Doctor of the Church by Pope Paul VI on October 4, 1970. Saint Catherine of Siena and Saint Teresa of Avila became the first women to receive that title. Today, Catherine of Siena is regarded as one of the most influential saints in church history, proving the truth of her words, "Be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire." Prayer. O Saint Catherine of Siena, you who were so deeply loved by God and devoted to His service, intercede for us before the throne of grace. May your example inspire us to live lives of faith, charity, and service to others as you did. Amen.